way I could find. Okay, cool. It says it's connected, so let me go find that link. It doesn't give me a stable link. When I tested it previously, it would give me a different link each time. So let me see.
Okay. I'll try to send it to my phone then. You send it in the chat.
Yeah, it's just really hard to find for some reason. Like they don't really give you a URL, and it's only showing the link from the test I ran yesterday, so maybe it just takes a minute to show up.
So I see FennelConf live on your channel. So I see FennelConf.
Is it from yesterday though?
No. It's a current stream. You can hear me talking back from it. Is it from yesterday though?
Well, there you go. Okay.
Yeah,
it's not showing up on my channel. When I view my channel page, it just shows me the one from yesterday. So I don't know what's going on.
I'll send you a link.
Sure. Thanks. Oh, okay. I see it now. It just took a minute to show up. I don't know why. That's weird. Okay, great. I'm going to send this out. Cool.
And will you update the page FennelConf to include it?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Cool.
So if we send this link right now, people will be able to see like this stream.
Yeah,
while we're preparing for the talks. I mean.
Yeah, that's true. So, but I just want to. I think it's better to have it out and make sure everyone knows where they're going and stuff. So.
Okay, I'm just going to delay this then until 9 o'clock. I mean, it's in my time zone.
Yeah, sure.
I had some people who wanted to like watch this event.
Oh yeah, great. Some friends.
Well, they are not friends. They are just like someone I know. They were interested.
Sure, acquaintances.
Yeah. When I'm typing, it's pretty loud, I'm sure, yeah?
Not as loud as when I tried it yesterday on the test stream without my headset. I was really banging on it. You can hear it, but it's it doesn't like overwhelm the talking.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a headset with a microphone, so I'm using my laptop mic. But I have an external mic. It's standing right here with me, and I have an external like sound card. However, for some reason in Linux, I can either select like output to headphones and use internal mic, or I can use the external mic from sound card, but then it will output sound to like speakers, and I don't know why.
Oh boy, yeah, that's always fun. I found when I'm using an internal mic, as long as I use an external keyboard, it's usually helpful. For mine, at least, having the internal mic and the internal keyboard together is what makes a terrible racket. But I don't know. Yours might be different.
Mine is, if I'm not mistaken, my microphone is in like the lead, so it shouldn't be like near the keyboard. But
oh yeah, I think they started doing that in newer laptops, but mine is before that was realized as the right place to put the microphone. Maybe.
I'm not sure because newer models of a lot of laptops that I see include like a camera at the bottom of the screen because everyone wants to make as thin borders as possible, and not like Apple, who made like a big black area at the top. So they put a camera at the bottom of the screen because you will have a little border there pretty much always, and the microphone then is put there as well. And it's still close to a keyboard, and when you are typing, you actually like blocking yourself with your hands. So people see your hands, but you are like behind your hands. It's absurd.
Good grief! What on earth?
Yeah. So we had like keyboard. We had like laptops with camera at the top of the screen, which were fine, but the microphone was usually like right near the touchpad. So when you used like your hands, you could block it. You could type, and it will be like loud as heck. And then they like started to put microphone at the top, and I thought, yeah, fine, finally. And now we have like going back to that, and external like cameras are still now again like the thing that you want, because for some reason like laptop manufacturers like they don't think about how it's going to be used. They just think that we don't have any other place, so yeah.
It's always one thing or another. Hello, welcome.
Andrew. There you go.
Hello, glad to have you joining us.
Perfect. Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome.
Can you hear me on mine?
Yeah, you're coming through clearly.
Excellent.
Good. You want to do a quick screen share just to make sure all that's operational?
Yeah, I've got it set up here so that I'm running through OBS, switch to this, and then I should be able to. Can you see my screen, or does it come in blurry?
Oh, it's pretty blurry.
Yeah. It's pretty blurry.
What's going on here? Then let me switch over to screen share. Let's go like this.
Are you in OBS?
Yeah, so I'm sending through OBS and using
try window projector and then share like the window projector into GT. That's what I'm doing, and it's like perfect.
Is that through OBS or is that through?
Yeah. It's through OBS. You just right click on your like entire canvas, and it says window projector. It will create a separate window. Then you can share that.
Window projector preview. Excellent.
I'm using full screen projector if it matters. Yeah, and then you can share like a specific window from GT.
Sounds like you all actually mostly know what you're doing, as opposed to me, who's just clicking around in the in the buttons. Like, what can I find?
I just want my talking head to be like placed on the slides, not like in the Jitsy's small UI, because it tend to like disappear from time to time. So, and looking at myself, I realized that I need to go and shave. So I'll be right back.
That's why we get an early start. Yeah, still looking pretty blurry here.
Right now I'm trying to get my camera stuck on this one and just share separately. So I've got his Andre's suggestion. We can just figure out how to actually share it now.
Your mic also went a little murky there. I caught about half of that.
Okay. Once again, glad that I logged in a few minutes early. Let's go to share audio.
Good to be prepared.
Video. I go to myself. It's like just a sec. It's like I have a blur function on by default. That's what's going down. Virtual backgrounds, none. Okay. There we go. Is that any
That's
better?
a lot better. Yeah. Cool. That's what we want to see.
Okay, perfect. And then does my scene switching work now, or am I still? Let's go to full camera.
So it's showing you've got the little non-Jitsi picture-in-picture there, which is what Andre was talking about as well.
Perfect. And then if I go to preview here, I can switch to my main person, myself, and then my screen. Perfect. Okay, problem solved. Did my audio fix itself?
Yeah, it seems fine now.
Perfect. Speak into the mic. That's the key.
Right. Can't go wrong with that. Cool. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go caffeinate a little bit, and I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Right on. Great. If you're watching on the stream downstream, we've got chat is just going to be in the Fennel channel, so that can be on Libera chat on IRC, or the one on Matrix as well if you prefer that. It's all good. We'll get going at the top of the hour.
Do you have like a web version for the chat? Because I don't have any IRC client set up.
Oh yeah, you can use. There's one called the Lounge. That's like a web-based IRC, but you can also use app.element.io for joining the Matrix side. And if you do that one, you get all the history and stuff as well from since you joined.
Okay, I'm going to use Element then. Thanks.
Yeah, Hopefully it's not too distracting.
Oh, it's not distracting at all. It doesn't load.
That's one way to solve it.
Disabling the ad blocker helps. It's on matrix.org or somewhere else.
Oh, the matrix channel is, yeah, hashtag Fennel:Matrix.org. Yeah, I made the choice to contribute to this further centralization of the decentralized protocol.
So it's a home server, yes?
It's on this centralized home server. Yeah.
No, I'm registering right now, so I need to like put a home server.
Oh, you can either register on matrix.org or have another home server, but I don't know of any other home servers that are like that I could recommend necessarily. So if you just want to get going, the easiest thing is to register on matrix.org as your home server. I am also going to take just a quick break and come back in a few minutes. So see you in a few. All right, I am back. Yeah. Looks good.
It was a bit blurry on my end, but I guess it's just connection issues if Phil says it's Looking good. Oh, I'm going to check on YouTube. If you could demonstrate again.
I guess I'll share mine too, just to make sure everything's coming through okay. We're going to need the entire screen. And there we go. Okay.
Yeah, it's working good on YouTube. It's showing everything really great.
Cool. Thanks for checking.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you figured it out with Alex before when I was like away, but when I came back, I had Alex screen share blurry, so maybe we should recheck it on YouTube. And also, I can hear Alex.
Yeah, so it turns out I had a blur filter on my camera, which was also going through to my screen display. So, yeah, it was a little bit blurry.
Well, I can see you on YouTube much clearer than I can see you in Jitsi, so I guess it's just Jitsi thing. So yeah, I'm a certified YouTube technician. If you need to know how to like bypass all of the blocking of YouTube. But I don't know anything else.
Nice.
Also, Phil, two like points. First one about questions. Will we have questions like after talks?
I was hoping we could probably save this for the end and then just kind of do after all the talks, do the questions then, just to keep the pace going.
My issue with that is that people tend to forget like earlier talks at all. So it can potentially like be like discussed only as last talk, maybe. And I'm the last one to talk, so maybe it will like be disturbing to other performers today. But also, like most conferences do it like after talks. So I thought maybe we could like give about 3 to 5 minutes. It will be not like disturbing to the pace, but it's as you say. So I'm not like going to force this. So, hello. And the second point I wanted to ask was like perhaps you should like force disable camera when a talk starts, because people can like enable camera for questions and stuff, but when the talk is going, usually camera feed like makes connection really poor for some people. So if I'm mistaken, for like moderators, there is a button to like shut down all of the cameras.
Yeah. Good call. Right. Especially if you've been mentioning your connection is had a few like clarity issues, then that would probably be smart. So I'll do that once. Once we kick off each talk. Cool. Yeah. I can leave it up to each individual speaker. If you want to do, some time for talks right after yours versus if you want to wait till the end. That's if you're concerned people will forget their questions and stuff. That's all right. Yeah.
I'm going to write my questions so I won't forget.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Could also do questions asynchronously in chat as well, but that's a little awkward and can be distracting to whoever is speaking. So let's not. We don't need to.
Well, we have the first question, if anyone can recognize an emblem on your shirt, because I don't think that anyone will, because it's below the camera.
Oh, right. I got it. Yeah. Okay. That'll be one question that we'll save for the end, the Q&A after the talks. So
looks like a fairy.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it's time. So we got all the speakers here, and I guess we can kick off the 6th FennelConf. Hard to believe it's been going that long. So I'm really excited to see what y'all have to present, and looking forward to the talks. So there's 6 talks coming up, and then we'll have a time afterwards for Q&A and just general discussion and things like that. So stick around, and we'll get going. I put myself first on the list, not because I am like, ooh, I got to be first, but just because I feel like it can be some pressure to put someone else first. So I figured I'd take that myself. So let's get going with the first talk. What even is a coroutine? So I'm going to pull up my screen share and kick us off here. So what even is a coroutine? So we all know that Fennel semantics come from Lua, and Lua is a simple language. Everyone gets Lua, right? But every now and then you come across some Lua feature that feels a little different, something outside the conventional toolbox of strings, data structures, functions. So today I want to talk about coroutines specifically. What is a coroutine? Coroutines are related to functions, but they're not. The coroutine is not a function itself. In order to create a function, in order to create a coroutine, you need a function to put inside of it. So here is the absolute simplest way to do that. Coroutine.create, and we'll just put a function in there. And what did we get back here? Well, Lua calls them threads, which is a little confusing. They are not like operating system threads, POSIX threads, as you may be familiar with from other languages. Coroutines are a form of cooperative multitasking, whereas OS threads are a form of preemptive multitasking. So what does that mean? Well, the OS has a scheduler, which is going to decide when to run or pause an OS thread, and that's the preemptive part. With coroutines, that doesn't exist. It's up to you to schedule, run them and pause them yourself. So despite having some similarity to OS threads, you really don't use them in the same way. So I would hesitate to lean on that analogy too hard. Coroutines start out suspended. So our C there that we just created is suspended. in order to run them, we use the function coroutine.resume. So what does that look like? Well, it gives us our value back that our function returned. So in the trivial case, it does kind of behave just like a function. But if it were a function, then we could call it again. But it can't resume dead coroutines. So that's because each coroutine represents just one single run of a function. So far, it just sounds worse. Like, okay, you have a function you can only call once. Great. Like, what good is that? So in order for it to be interesting, you need a function that yields. So let's try that. We're going to yield twice in here. We're going to put that into a coroutine. And then we're going to resume it here, and then here, and then it returns nothing, and then it's stopped. It's dead. It can't go any further. So yielding is like returning, but when you resume it, you start back where you were previously. So we yielded here, and then we got our 1 back, and then we resumed it again, and it continued onto here and yielded here, and then you got to the end of the function. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's coroutines. Thanks. That's my talk. Just kidding. No, there's one more thing. You can pass in values when you're resuming, and they get returned by yield. So let's take a look at an example for this. We've got here, we're going to use the return value of yield, and we're going to yield x, and then we're going to recurse that. So hopefully that makes sense. We're yielding our initial value, we're adding it, and then we're just going to recurse there. Let's put that in a coroutine and start resuming it with a value, right? So first off, it's 1 because that was our x, and then we went straight to yield. So second time, it's 2 because it's our previous x plus the second yield. Let's just throw in another number there, 8, and so on, and it just keeps going. So you'll notice that the function never actually needs to return. It can loop forever, and that's fine as long as it yields at some point. Okay, that's it for real now this time. That is the whole thing. So it's deceptively simple. But, of course, what can you do with it? That's the question. Coroutines allow you to write non-blocking code that looks linear. Right? So without coroutines, writing non-blocking code means leaning on callbacks, which can be a big pain. Here's an example from a game called Tower Institute of Linguistics. It's a little bit simplified from what was in the game, but it demonstrates why this is useful. And if you are following along at home and you want to take a look, go to this URL, and then these links will lead you to the examples. So let's start by looking at this move function here. So how does this work? Well, first the worker takes a look and tries to decide what direction they want to move. So in this case, they change their x. In this case, they change their y, and then they take a single step in that direction, right? And then they yield. And then if they haven't reached their target yet, they recurse. That's it. So it looks like a pretty normal recursive loop. The only difference is it's got a yield right in the middle of it. So this function, you could imagine it working with callbacks. It wouldn't be that bad to convert it to callbacks, but it really shines when you integrate it into a more complex flow, which is actually what's going on here. So let's take a look down at the bottom. We've got this start function that kicks off that the coroutine is going to be created with initially. So for context, let's see, in this game, you're giving orders to workers, and the orders get picked up by workers, but orders require 2 workers working together in order to accomplish them. So without blocking the main loop, the workers need to decide what to do next and coordinate on their work. So we're going to use a couple tables as cues for this. We've got this order queue here and this help queue here, and that's gonna, so we're gonna use these down below. So assume somewhere else in the code, someone is pushing orders onto the order queue. The worker coroutine is gonna try to pop something off that queue, and if it finds something, it's gonna take the order. What does that look like? Well, once you take an order, you add yourself to the help queue because you need help. And then you set yourself to waiting, so you're going to block yourself. And then you're going to move to the location of the order. So as we saw previously, every step of that move is going to yield. So we're not blocking the main flow of the game. Once you reach there, move is going to return, and then we're going to enter this loop, which is saying, we set our waiting to true. We're going to just wait here and continue to yield. And every tick, we're going to increment our frustration counter, but we're just going to be kind of stuck here until someone else helps us. Once someone does come along and we can exit this loop, then we take the order and we build it, which means iterating over all the tiles of the order. What does that order consist of? Moving to the individual tile, and which, of course, as we discussed, yields every step of the way, and then calls this build function on that tile. So that's when you take an order. If there were no orders to take, then we're going to take a look at the help queue here, and if someone does need help, we give help to that other worker. So what does that mean? Well, we're first going to move to their location, which, as we've discussed, yields the entire way. And this is where we unblock the other worker. So now they can exit their while loop, and they can build the order together with that other worker. So there's a bit of hand waving here, like what does this self.build function do? But the point is the overall flow is pretty clear, even coordinating across these independent workers. It's pretty readable, and the non-blockingness of it never gets in the way of the code. Try to imagine what this would look like using callbacks. You'd have to turn the whole thing inside out. You can't use any recursion. You can't use any loops. It just wouldn't read smoothly because you'd be constantly distracted by trivialities of the non-blockingness. So, that's our first example. Now, other languages have similar constructs to this. We've talked about OS threads, which are similar in a lot of ways. But then, even within a single thread, you have things like generators in Python and JavaScript. So generator functions can yield similarly, but generator functions can only yield from their body. If they call another function, that function can't yield unless that other function is a generator function itself, and then you can kind of do a nested yield. But there's serious restrictions on it. So if you've heard of function coloring, that is a closely related problem. Well, this is basically the same problem. So there's this article here called "What Color Is Your Function?" that goes into a lot of detail about about that problem. So I'd recommend that if you're interested in that. So generators are a lower level construct from coroutines, but if you use certain macro like tricks, you can implement what's called a stackless coroutine by splitting up the functions on the yield boundaries and turning them into generators. This is pretty cool because you can do this at compile time without any support from the underlying virtual machine. Like it's purely a compile time trick. Fennel, we love our compile time tricks, but it does have one critical limitation, and that is you can only yield from a generator function. So that would be fine for this example here, right? Because we wrote all this code. We could, like, if we had generator fun, we could just change all our functions to generator fun, and the yield wouldn't be an issue. But if we wanted to yield from code someone else wrote that wasn't yield aware, well, that gets a little more complicated. So Let's imagine you are writing a program using a GUI toolkit, and the GUI toolkit provides you with an event loop, sure, and you can't block the event loop, but you want to integrate fennel.repl. You want to add a REPL to your program. So that's going to be a problem if you do it naively. If you just call fennel.repl, that is going to call, somewhere in the guts of it, it's going to call io.read, which is going to read from standard in. And that's no good. You're writing a GUI program. You don't want to send your input through the standard in. So luckily, fennel.repl has a solution for us. It'll allow us to override the how we get our input. So let's just start off with some canned input and do this here. Just imagine that this is coming from some other source, but for now we'll just put it from a table. So we're going to run fennel.repl using an options table, and we're going to say our read chunk function is table.remove remove lines 1. Okay, so this is just going to pull that canned data, and then we run that. It reaches the end of the table, and it does our addition, and that's great. So we aren't necessarily tied to standard in with fennel.repl is the point there. But let's take a look at a bigger example that that uses the REPL. Here we go. So this program ties fennel.repl into a Love2D input and drawing setup. So we start out by, we've got a few lines here. We can put stuff in. We've got this. This is kind of like our output function. We're going to take whatever we were outputting and stuff it into the lines table. And then we're going to create the REPL coroutine. And that's just going to take fennel.repl. And we're going to resume it using this options table. So first, we just tell it, oh, hey, we have this on values. Don't print it to standard out. Use this instead. But instead of writing a function to get the input from a GUI element, the readchunk function is just directly going to be coroutine.yield. And so that fennel.repl function is just going to run until the point that it needs input, at which point it yields. So that's, that's running at this point. Don't worry, we're going to resume it soon. Our text input handler just shoves it into the input field. And then we've got this little helper function. It's going to take that input, turn it into a string, and clear it, and slap a new line on the end. And then here in love.keyPress, the important thing in here is when return or enter is pressed, we're going to run that helper function to grab that input out of the table. And we're just going to pass it to the REPL coroutine as a resume. Finally, we finish off with love.draw, which I'm not going to get into because it's pretty straightforward. But that's all it takes for us to build this. So if we run this, you can see here we've got our buffer at the bottom of input, and it goes to the top in the lines, and we've got all that there. And we have, this is the real fennel.repl that has comma commands and all that great stuff. So yeah, that's that. So what's different about this from the previous example, right? In some senses, it's simpler. There's just one loop instead of a whole series of actions, and it only yields in one place instead of yielding from a bunch of different functions. But the really important thing is when you look at the code that's running in the coroutine, we didn't write that code, and that code was not written to be a non-blocking function. Like fennel.repl does not know that it's running in a coroutine. All it has to do is say, when you've got some input for me, it needs to accept some function that lets us say how to provide the input. And that's it. For the rest of the code, it's completely irrelevant that input yields. And that's all it takes. it's important to note that yield here is not syntax. This is just a first class function. So that allows us to put it in an options table, pass it as an argument to another function, etc., with no like wrapper needed or anything. So this technique here, with REPL being unaware of coroutines, is not possible in language using stackless coroutines. This style requires runtime support in the VM. So it works great in Lua, but it wouldn't work in like Python or JavaScript. You can turn any non-blocking code, regardless of whether it was originally written with that in mind or not. So if you've ever used the site itch.io, you've benefited from this because itch.io is written in Moonscript, which compiles to Lua. They've got a great write-up here about how they use coroutines for their I/O, talking to database and payment provider services and things like that. So definitely check that out if you're interested. This has this goes into a lot of detail comparing this to the approach of using callbacks. So that's great. One final note here, errors in the coroutine are not going to bubble up when you do coroutine.resume. So you get false back when it didn't complete successfully. So it can be pretty easy to overlook that and to have an error that you miss in there. So you might want to assert or do a case every time you resume to avoid this problem and make it really obvious when there's an error. But another way to do it would be to use coroutine.wrap instead of coroutine.resume. So we can do this, and then nope. Let's bring that back here, and then coroutine.wrap here. And now we don't have to use coroutine.resume. We can just call F. Ooh, sorry. All right, we'll call that C, F2. Because in that case, it is a function. And you can call it directly with any number you want, and it'll yield like that. And that handles the assert for you. If there is an error in there, it will bubble up. So that can be a little bit, a nicer bit of ergonomics. Once you understand, coroutine.create and coroutine.resume, you can switch to coroutine.wrap that tidies a few things up. Makes it a lot easier not to forget to check the error status. So yeah, that's it. Give it a try. Next time you need to write some non-blocking code, make it nice and linear and using coroutines. That's all I got. Once again, if you want to check out the examples or the the links I provided, technomancy.us/talks/coroutines. It's also linked from the FennelConf 2024 page. But yeah, that's it for this talk. So I'll drop my sharing and cool. Okay, great. Next up, let's see. For my talk, I think if we have any questions, I think I'd prefer to have them saved to the very end. We'll have a little time for Q&A after the talks are over. But yeah, we will move on to Andre, and he's going to be giving 2 talks today, and his first one is called deps.fnl. So yeah, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everyone. Can you see my slides? I think you should be able to.
Yeah, so looks good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this talk is going to be about my latest project for Fennel ecosystem that I made. I made a number of projects like this before, and I write mostly libraries for Fennel, so I don't do games or programs in Fennel. Usually libraries are my passion. And because I make a lot of libraries, a lot of these libraries pushing Fennel in all of different kind of ways, and some problems arise from that. For instance, I have a lot of libraries that feature macros, and I want my libraries to be easier to install. This means that I'm trying to make these libraries as a single file, for example, and Fennel can't really provide macros and functions from the same Fennel file, except it can, but it's quite a dirty trick to do, but I did it nonetheless. And this means that libraries have to be prepared in some kind of way for shipment. I don't really like to do that because it's often cumbersome. It's sometimes it's really hard to do. Sometimes I have to do some text substitution with my source code. So I wanted a more straightforward and simple way for handling this situation. Then there are also other kind of problems. For example, not so long ago, I made a big post on Fennel mailing list about identity problems in libraries that use a singleton pattern to create some state or to differentiate between objects and such. And if you have this library in your project, and you also have another library that uses this library in itself, it can possibly be a problem if your version of library in your project and the versions that the library uses are different. Lua will happily load both libraries, and you will have two exemplars of the same library, which means that if you will try to pass an object from one library to another library, it will potentially raise an error that they don't know what to do with this object if it's a singleton, for example. So there are a lot more detail on this topic listed in the mailing list post. So if you want, you can go and read it in more detail, because there are a lot of text in this post. But to make life kind of easier for me and to solve this problem, I made deps FNL. Before we are going to talk about the project itself, I want to discuss some ways of how can we manage dependencies right now. And there are three main ways. First one is LuaRocks. The second one is Git, and there also is a technique, I would say, for vendoring your dependencies inside your project. I have used all three techniques, I would say, in the past. I have some libraries that use LuaRocks for some dependencies that are Lua-based. I have experimented with Git and also with vendoring, and I came to the conclusion that none of these ways is achieving that level of convenience that I want. So hence I made this project. So why not LuaRocks, for example? First of all, I'm not an expert in LuaRocks. I don't know how to write LuaRock specs. I don't know how to ship libraries to LuaRocks. And because of that, I'm not even sure if it can provide non-Lua files. And I know that it can compile C stuff and put SO files to some directory on your system. But I know that LuaRocks can only generate Lua pass and Lua C pass. So even if LuaRocks can ship Fennel files, I'm not sure if it will be able to put it in the pass, because usually it's a Lua pass. And if it can't, then we can always compile our libraries to Lua, but then macros are problematic, because when we compile to Lua, our macros are going away, basically. So we can ship macros with LuaRocks. It's also a bit cumbersome. It uses a giant directory on your system where all of the dependencies are, and when it builds pass, all of contents of this directory are going into the pass, so you can't have control of what version of library you really want to use. So, and because of that, it's a bit outdated, because modern package managers do it in a bit different way. So then why not Git? And first of all, Git submodules are a real pain. Each time I have to use a Git submodule in my project, it's fine, but when I want to update a library that my project depends on, it's a pain. You have like a lot of files in your repository that you have to commit, because again, it's not commit, I mean, you have to pull recursively, and it's a bit cumbersome. And you have to manually construct paths, because otherwise you won't be able to load your library, unless you are using like absolute paths, which is not really ideal way for me, because some of my libraries depend on where they are located. And then why not vendoring? Well, vendoring is actually pretty cool because you have full control of where you put your libraries, how you require them, but still you have to do a lot of manual work to set up paths, to like compile libraries if they need a compilation step. If you want to update a library, it's again all this manual work. And if you have a lot of libraries and each one had some steps to take for installation, it's you are going to go through every library and remember how to update and install them. So again, not ideal, but it works. So that brings us to deps FNL. It's a file that sits at the root of your project and describes what dependencies your project requires to be either built or run. It's also a small script that sits in your path, your shell path that you can call, and it knows how to read these deps FNL files. It knows how to download dependencies specified in these files. It knows how to build these dependencies if they require a build step. And it also can automatically generate paths for Lua, Fennel, and macro paths. So with these bullets, I think it hits all of the targets that I set for myself. I'm not sure if it will be enough for general use, but we can always expand on that. So as I mentioned, we have a file at the root of a project, and here is an example from one of my projects. It's an HTTP client, and it uses three Fennel libraries, one of which is async, JSON, and reader. And all three of these are Git type. So it means that it uses Git to pull these dependencies into your project. And we specify an URL, and tag is either a branch or a tag that you want to check out to. So you can have different versions of libraries if the maintainer of the library took time and put tags on the Git or branches. And we also have one Lua library, which is Lua socket, and it's type of rock. So it also knows how to pull Lua rocks dependencies for you automatically. And then there is a second key, which is a mandatory key in this file. So you have either only paths or deps and paths, but you can't have a deps FNL file without path, because it specifies how to construct paths for your project. So for example, for this project, I am specifying that everything inside src and src.init FNL should be going into paths. And this basically means that when I start my REPL, I will be able to load all of the modules from the src directory. And here is how the deps directory looks. It's a directory that is created by the script. When you call it, it will create this directory, download all of the libraries that you specified in the deps file, and put it into two root directories. One is Git for Git dependencies, and the rocks for Lua rocks stuff. Then it uses names specified as keys in the deps FNL file to store these dependencies. So basically, it doesn't matter what you put here. It should be just some unique string, which will give the name to the directory to put a library. And then this directory is a branch name or tag from these files. As you can see here, it specifies deps. So if you have several libraries, for example, if some of these libraries required async and it used a different tag, so on this in this directory async, there would be two directories hosting the same library but of different versions. So you can have multiple versions of the same library in your project. But it won't work, but I will get to that a bit later. So, and then in this directory, basically all of the files from the library itself are going to be, because it's a Git clone, everything from the repository that the developer used will be here, but it's a shallow clone, so like, you want to pull all of the history. It's just like a narrowed down version of this repository. And after pulling this repository, if it sees that it has like a deps FNL file inside of it, it will process it recursively and execute all of the necessary stuff. If this deps file has a build like command which should be executed, it will change the directory to this directory, execute this build script, and then process all of the other dependencies specified by this deps FNL. So it's recursive. It can like download all of the necessary stuff to your project and basically make sure that your project is ready to go. It can also generate paths.
Okay, we should be back. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it can generate paths. If you call deps --paths, it will like put out variables for shell invocation, and you can see that for this project we have a Lua path, which mainly consists of rocks and all stuff that Lua rocks put in. Fennel path, which consists of like my path from the root deps FNL. Then there is like deps git reader, deps git async, deps git JSON, and path is constructed for you automatically. And cpath is again from Lua rocks, but if some of the deps FNL files specifies Lua path or Lua cpath, it will be added to this. But deps is not just a script for running dependencies, it's also a drop-in replacement for Fennel launcher. So you can just call deps, and it will do all the preparations. It will download if something is missing, it will construct path and start a REPL. And you can also do like all your usual stuff. So you can just, for example, say deps -c to compile some for FNL. It will work too, and you can run deps help. It will show you Fennel help and so on. So in this example, it starts a REPL, and as you can see, I can require my library, which is located under SRC catalog, but here I'm just requiring all the nested part because it was already in the path, and the function exists. So deps basically made everything automatically that I had to do manually before. I'm using this deps script as my like Fennel program in Emacs. So when I start a REPL, it automatically starts the REPL in the root of the project and sets up everything for me. So I'm pretty happy with that, and it's possible to use it in this way. So anything you can do with like Fennel executable, you can do with deps. So now about conflicts. I mentioned that if you have like two versions of the library, like in this case, I think, and if there was another directory here with a different branch name, it will be a conflict. Why? Because I'm like working with other languages, and primary it's a Clojure. And at work, we use Leiningen, which is a dependency like manager for Clojure. And there is also deps Idian, which is Clojure deps, which this project is heavily inspired by. And both of these have some strategies to deal with conflicts. Maven, which is used for like getting all of the dependencies, if I'm not mistaken, it uses the lowest common denominator version. So basically, if you depend on some library A of version 2 and library B, which itself depends on library A version 1, your project will use version 1, unless you like exclude from dependency B the dependency A, so you force it to use version 2 that you have. I don't like this because usually when you specify a library in your project, you want this version of the library. You don't want like some other version that some of the libraries may have depended on. So, and we can't really say, fine, let's just use our version because the library might break. So I chose to make it an error. When an error occurs, you can still like bypass it by using the allo conflicts flag. So it will start, and then it will honor your library version that you specified in your root deps FNL file, because it will basically appear earlier in the path. But at least you will be signaled that you have a conflict, and if you can either like downgrade your version to avoid this situation, or go and try to fix a dependency to update it to a newer version of the library if it's possible. So that's my solution to conflicts, and this also means that I can have, like I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, I have some libraries that can only exist as a single like exemplar of a library, and this takes care of it as well. So that's basically it, and there are of course pros and cons to this solution. So pros are that it's a really small source code for this like project. It's about 300 lines of code. With documentation without it's even less. It doesn't depend on anything but Fennel, so you can stuff it anywhere, and you don't need any extra dependencies. It can handle both Git and Lorox, as you can see before on the slides, and processes them recursively. Basically what I just told you before. But because it's like a drop-in replacement for Fennel, I think it can be potentially included in the launcher Fennel itself, so we can have like an official way of managing libraries for Fennel projects. It would be really cool, because if Fennel had an official way to do this, we could all settle on a single format for like dependency description, and basically we won't need anything but Fennel for this kind of stuff. I don't really like that this is a separate project, because then it's like plugin managers in Vim. You have so many ways to install plugins into Vim that I don't know what plugin manager to use if I want to use Vim. Luckily, I don't use Vim, but it's a problem. So there are also cons. There are no cons cells in Fennel, so there are no cons for this project. Well, okay, I'm kidding. Right now, it's implemented in a happy path way, I would say. So I don't check for too much like errors or potentially weird situations that can occur. I have some error checking, of course. So if it can't download a dependency, or if it can't like do something with text and Lorox, it will signal an error and notify user what happened. But there might still be some tricky situations that I haven't seen coming. Windows operating system is not like tested; it's supported. I made sure to make that it so the paths use like converted slashes and so on. Environment libraries, environment variables are extracted in a different way for Windows, so it should work, but I don't have means for testing it, because even though I have Windows on my laptop, I honestly don't know how to install Libera on it, and Lorox and Git. So if anyone could test it for me, it will be great. And this file is not purely functional, so there might be some bugs related to that, because it has to like set up state and so on, but I don't think there is another way to implement it, at least for now. So you can try it yourself. You can clone this repository like shown in this script. Just symlink it to somewhere in your like path. For example, in my case, it's local bin. And then you can, for example, clone a Fennel HTTP project with a branch depth, because right now it's an experimental state, so I made a separate branch for that, and try it. So it will like download all of the libraries needed for this project, and start your REPL where you can try like stuff with Fennel HTTP. So that's basically that for me. If you have like questions for this topic, I'm happy to answer now. If you don't want to do it now, you can do it after the conf is finished, but I'm open to questions at any time. So thank you for watching and listening, and back to you, Phil.
Great, thanks. So if there are any questions, I just realized we should maybe take a look in chat. So Matrix or IRC will give just a brief minute here to see if anything shows up. But yeah, there's always the post talk section here that we can do there instead. So if something comes up, there's that. Yeah, thanks. That was great. Is a very interesting topic for me since I worked on Line Again a lot, but in Line Again, we just were able to defer all the dependency handling to Maven and never actually did any of it ourselves. So that's really cool to see that this could be done in 300 lines and having it. Yeah,
I should say that I've been working on this project for like maybe 3 years. Not continually. I tried to make it, failed. Then I deleted everything, started from scratch, and this was going like for 3 years. And right now I'm like feeling that it's finally ready to be shown to the world. So it's 300 lines of code, but it took a long way to get there.
That's the classic Fennel way to do things is don't do it until you've had enough time to think it all the way through.
Yeah.
Great. It looks like there was one question on chat. Zero says, I'm curious if it's sandboxed. Imagine one of the things I'm dependent on updates. I want to look at the changes first before any code runs. So
No, there is nothing like that just yet. Again, I mostly made it for like more set of needs. So if there is something that is like requested by the community, I'm willing to put my time and implement it. So sandboxing is one thing that I don't think I can really handle sandboxing because if some library requires a build step, if some library requires a build step, there is a prompt in the shell asking you if you want to execute this script that shows you what the library will do for building. So in this way, it is sandbox, but it doesn't have like a dry run right now. So it will just show you what it will do. I can add that if it's what is asked for. But I think a proper sandboxing should have like a more like in-depth discussion to figure out what's needed and what's not necessary.
yeah, and Zero says, if there's a prompt, then that's fine for me. So excellent talk, excellent project. Cool. Thanks. Great. So let's move on to the next one here. We've got Alice Brooks, who's going to be talking about everything under the sun. So go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so far I've been enjoying the talks. They've both given me ideas or things to look into, which is what I love about tech conferences. In addition to meeting people. So thank you. Okay. So my talk is about everything under the sun. To stay within the time, I am only talking about the game Everything Under the Sun and not literally everything under the sun, because I think that would take a little bit longer. So maybe I will just... So Everything Under the Sun is a jam game for the TIC80. And I knew that would happen. Okay. Okay. So I have the TIC80 running here. So the TIC80 is a fantasy console. So I'm just going to start the game. So it's Everything Under the Sun is a god game. So you kind of survey the earth or the world, and you have these godly powers you can enact on your creation. So here is, so it is made for the TIC 80, which is a fantasy console or tiny computer. So fantasy consoles are kind of a newer thing, I feel like, in the past 5 or 10 years, although I'm sure there are older examples where it basically mimics a console, kind of like an emulator, but the console doesn't exist. So instead of emulating an NES or a DOS machine or something, it's emulating a fictional computer. So this one is the TIC 80, which is, let's see, which is kind of goes all in on Lua and even has support for Fennel built in, plus a couple other scripting languages. I think it has like MoonScript. And I think it has a couple other ones like Wren. Oh yeah, here's the list: Lua, Ruby, JS, Moon, Fennel, Scheme, Squirrel. So it's very much a polyglot tool. And you can kind of see its specifications. It's limited to 240 by 136 pixels, 16 color palette. The input is just 8 buttons, but you can also use the mouse. And then there's like a limited number of sprites and map tiles. Although you can kind of, it has like memory you can mess around with, so there's quite a bit of creativity you can do with those limits. And then it has some 4-channel sound. The other cool thing about it is, if I go to here, it actually has all the tools built in. It's kind of a standard feature of most virtual consoles, which makes them really nice for game jams, because it kind of gives you the whole toolkit and also gives you limitations. So I am not an artist, so having like a simplified sprite editor is helpful for me. So you can kind of see the tiles. And these are the sprites. So, and then it just comes with a map editor, so you can kind of pretty easily get started with some sort of really basic map. Also has sound editors. And this is like a little tracker, basically, and this is like a simplified sound effects editor. It also has a code editor, which I opted not to use. I'm so used to Vim, and I thought that would be just a little too much. There is actually a limit on the overall size. I think it's, yeah, it's just in bytes, about half a megabyte. So I found it to be really fun to work with. I think having it all kind of straightforward really made it kind of a tight loop of like coming up with an idea and then implementing it. And it helped that it was in a language I was familiar with, in a language I'm guessing most of the people watching are familiar with. Even if you're new to Fennel, it has so many language options. I'm sure there's one you can experiment with. The other thing that makes it great for Jam is it has like built-in export functionality. So you don't really have to worry too much about releasing it, which is just kind of nice in general. I like to release games on Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, so it's kind of as easy as possible for people to play it. and web. So you can see you can actually run it right in the browser. So I also like that. Actually, just going to, and it actually jumps right in the game, so you don't have to like type run manually. Should be a little bit awkward. Okay, so I'm just going to refresh this so it's not running the game. Yeah. So what also helped was you can pretty easily just import a color palette. So I use this really pretty Miyazaki 16 palette. It's basically, but other than that, I basically, and other than Fennel itself, I basically did all the assets myself, which is only possible because of the pretty intuitive tools and the fact that they have these limits. So it's all pretty nice. We'll look a little bit at the game. So you basically select from this kind of palette, I guess you could say, of God powers. So you can smite people. I'm going to smite this person. You can bless people. You can flood the land. You can dry the land. You can create lights. Yeah. And you're supposed to be able to extinguish them, but that does not work. Okay. So my thought process in designing it is that as a god, you don't really answer to anyone, so the game ends when you want it to, and there's no lose condition. So to end it, you can declare final judgment by pressing X twice. So, oh, sorry. It's the X button on the virtual console, but it's actually, I think, the A key. Okay. So it kind of describes your game. So by the end, there was over 1,000 people. There were 2,000 dogs and 7 cats. So the people regarded me as loving and mysterious. So it is a very open-ended game, or an open-ended game, which I think is kind of challenging for a jam for people to evaluate because there's not a clear stopping point for them to say, okay, I've given this game a fair shake. What do I think of it? So it does leave it a little bit open-ended. So that is kind of a downside. And then as the developer and as the player, I think it's a little bit hard to know what to do. So I think it's kind of a tricky game design question of like, how do you leave it open-ended while giving some direction or some hints, or maybe prodding the player to explore a little bit. I just develop games as a hobby, so I definitely don't have a grand thesis on how to do that. I thought I'd mention that. But nonetheless, people seem to like it. I think it was the number 5th in the Autumn List Game Jam for creativity, and 10th or 11th or something, 15th overall, maybe. So we have this. We can just press escape at any time to go to this menu. So I'm going to close it. So what does the code look like? So it has this little metadata at the top. What's relevant here is that we say it's Fennel script. That way it knows to use Fennel for it. Since I'm using the pro version of TIC80, I can actually, I think this is only in the pro version, I can start it as a Fennel source file. So this is probably one of the less structured games I've made for a game jam. I often like to do it in like distinct files for each kind of phase or mode of the game. So like the intro screen will have one file that controls its input, its drawing, and have its specific code, animations, and all that. And then like the actual gameplay would have a separate file. So this ended up, I think, not any messier than previous games, but it definitely had less built-in structure because the TIC80 doesn't really let you use multiple files. I think you can kind of use utilities to make it doable. Let's see. This part could probably be a little bit better. So this basically, but I'm just actually going to go. The other thing you can see is that all the assets are actually embedded directly in the source file. Which you can probably already imagine some of the pros and cons of that approach, especially maybe the cons. So the core functions are these globals. This is what it does with on booting, and this is what it does on every update or every tick. So it doesn't actually separate updating and drawing. So I just did that. So that was easy enough, but the nice thing about separating updating and drawing is you can keep updates going at a consistent clip and skip drawing. So logic stays pretty consistent while keeping it a little bit faster. So the TIC80 doesn't do that. Given the constraints, I think even on a pretty slow computer, our game should run pretty fast in a lot of cases. So I think it's a pretty reasonable trade-off, especially since for organization purposes, you can easily still divide up the updating and the drawing. So I just had separate update functions for the actual gameplay and the end. So this worked all right, I think. Let's see. And then kind of similar for the drawing code. So like I said, not a lot of structure. So I just have a table. It just kind of keeps track of everything. And that's kind of the structure of it. See that. It is, in some ways, I think not being able to separate out the modes was the thing I felt the most acutely. But yeah. One thing I haven't talked too much yet is that has
I think we lost your audio. Yeah, sorry. Could you double check your mic connection and yeah, thanks.
Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, we're back. Cool. Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry about that. Actually, I think it was coming through the wrong microphone anyway, so hopefully this sounds better in general. Yeah, so just like a like an older platform or a console, they have like a very specific layout of RAM. But I didn't actually have to worry too much about that. These are all the console commands, and then the API functions. So it has like a couple simple functions. So like just a single function to check the status of buttons, some things for drawing, a couple shapes, ones for checking the status of the keyboard, and for drawing a map. These are the memory functions I mentioned. Yeah, so it has maybe 20, 25 API functions, and I think you only probably can get by with using 5 to 10. If you're leaning heavily on kind of the built-in sprite and map structure. So, and you can go a long ways in terms of games with just using maps with sprites on top of them. If you want to add a little bit of animation flair on top of that, it gets a little bit more complicated. And obviously that wouldn't really encompass anything like particle effects or fancy shaders, but a lot of games historically have had the map static background, which is basically the map, and a couple things moving on top of it. So I think that does go a long way. So it is a really useful basic abstraction to have. And it's, I think, really handy to have available for a game jam. So yeah, since the API isn't too complicated, you can kind of just get up and running with whatever language. I don't think I did anything too fancy with Fennel itself. I think I wrote exactly one macro, which is just to kind of time expressions, since I wanted to make sure that when it was kind of building up a table of all the entities in the world and what was nearby, which it uses to do things like if a person is too close to a lion, the lion eats the person. People kind of try to spread apart if they're too crowded, if there's too many people around them. So there's like really basic logic. So beforehand, I pre-compute a table of basically every cell's neighbors, which is not like which isn't the most clever or efficient way to do that probably. But it does work fast enough. And to make sure it works fast enough, I wrote this tiny macro. So having that available, definitely useful. but I didn't really use a lot of fancy coding tricks, which honestly I think is to the credit of TIC80. It just kind of worked. I've said a lot of positive things about the TIC80, and I stand by them, but in the back of my mind, there were some like trade-offs. It definitely feels like a study in trade-offs. We put it all in one file, which kind of keeps it all together, and means in theory you wouldn't even have to use version control. I suppose you could just keep multiple versions of the file. I did use version control. You don't have to worry about forgetting to commit some of your assets or some of your source code files or whatever. It's all there. And you can also distribute it in that format. And there's a whole TIC80 website with cartridges, as they call them. So that's really nice. However, it does seem like it would quickly become kind of a nightmare if you're working with another person. I'd love to hear what strategies people have used, but the fact that since it's a single file, when I worked in U of M, it would overwrite whatever the console was doing or whatever I had edited in the console. If I wasn't a little bit mindful of like pressing save in U of M and loading it properly, they will get, if you're working in two editors like this, it will overwrite each other. You can avoid that by using the built-in editor, but if you're working with two people, it seems like it could be very easy. You have to like synchronize your work a little bit. And it'd be kind of a pain to synchronize with an artist, because if they're working on art at the same time you're working on the code, that's always going to be a change to the same file because it's all one file. So you can't or you can't like split off work easily because the assets are in the same file. And I find the limits really useful for creativity and not letting the scope of it explode during a game jam. But I'm sure if I was working on a longer term game project, I would run into them. So, and I've talked about the map and sprite API, and that's what I ended up using. However, you don't have to. I think people have made like pseudo 3D Doom games in the TIC80 or done like ray tracing or other things that have not used the sprite and map functionality very much, if at all. But even something like Love 2D, which exposes things like shaders and actual 3D, does give you more flexibility. And of course, using something like SDL or something, or RayLib would like open you up even more. So definitely trade-offs, but overall, I really like it, and especially to Fennel developers as it's built right in. That's basically all I had to say. Yeah, you can download and play it at my itch page. Just everything under the sun.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Would you like to take see if anyone has questions now, or do you want to save that for the end?
If there are questions now, I can answer them.
Cool. I'll just take a look at chat here and give folks a second here to see. But yeah, maybe maybe we'll just yeah, looks like not seeing anything. So if you do have something, you can bring it up at the end. Thanks a lot. Love to see the creativity and just all the different directions people take this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's really fun. Cool. Great work. Yeah. So yeah. Next up, we have a talk on how to learn macros the hardest way possible. So go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay?
Coming through fine. Thanks.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. Okay. And we can see this as well. All right. Yeah, just let me know in chat or anywhere else if you would like, if you have trouble seeing the text or, want to see another slide again. But with that out of the way, just again, thanks for giving me some time to talk about this today. I'm super impressed with what you folks have been putting together. It's like most of this is a little less implementation and maybe a little bit more memes. So it's interesting that I have to follow all of y'all who are building actual stuff. But nevertheless, my name is Emma, or Pink String Machine, and I am here to show you how you can learn macros the hardest way possible. So this is a case study of me trying to add behavior-driven development as a additional side library for Faith. So yeah, have you ever spent like multiple weekends working on absolute garbage code that probably isn't necessary for what you want to accomplish? I mean, I bet you have, right? All 9 of you that are here today have probably written some Fennel, and I mean, we're all presenting little projects, right? I mean, I'm joking, right? Writing Fennel is awesome, but I do want to appeal to the common programmer story, right? Of spinning in circles, trying to write something so fervently that you kind of forget why you even started in the first place. So this is a recount, a retrospective of my journey learning macros. It's a story about loss, heartbreak, redemption, anger. It's about writing garbage. And so, yeah, behavior-driven development. I want it in Fennel. And, it's like, I don't want any of that drivel, right? Where you start with like, the goal and then you write the conditions, right? I want to write the conditions first and then the goals, right? That's just the way my brain works. And so nothing was going to stand in the way of my overvalued and likely unnecessary desire for writing tests backwards. So hear me out. And yeah, last disclosure, or full disclosure, this is a presentation that's maybe 20% code, 20% considerations about Fennel, 20% humor, and 100% embarrassment. And yeah, I mean, I worked tirelessly for 143 minutes, so I really hope you enjoy it, and let's hope I don't blow it. Quick backgrounds around, why this is, say, educational for me and learning macros. I'm sure some of you folks are hella experienced with making them. I am not. So historically, I've done front-end development for a long time. I did Clojure professionally for a few years. And I did management for about 6 years, which I, adored, but I just recently moved back into software. And I've used Fennel off and on for the last several years. Did some game jams, wrote a couple of like fun little scripts. I use Fennel for NeoVim, but I've only really started digging in more in earnest over the last year. So
hey, sorry, real
yeah,
quick. We had some feedback on chat that maybe bumping the size up a couple notches would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. How does this look?
That's a lot
Are
better.
you able to see it okay? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Hey, thanks for giving me the feedback. Cool. So yeah, let's talk about behavior-driven tests and why do I want them in Fennel, right? Because I mean, let's look at Faith, right? Faith works perfectly fine. It's simple, and it's really small. And I think that those are all features to be valued. I found myself, though, wanting to start with the end behavior and less with the implementation. And I think that behavior-driven development kind of helps push you in that direction, right? It works more with my brain too. There's a sense that like I like starting with the goal, the outcome, and then working my way backwards to what that should do and what that shouldn't do when it fails. So, if you're not familiar, right, behavior-driven development is like, I'm not necessarily talking about the stuff with, say, gherkin or cucumber, right? I'm talking more about getting, something that looks similar, but inside of your actual code, right? I've definitely used gherkin in the past. Managing that middle layer is a lot of complexity. I really don't want to mess with it. So, the reason I like this nested approach is that it kind of matches backward chaining reasoning strategies. So, when we talk about software, I think we start with goal, like the goal, the purpose, right? We're not talking necessarily about the data or what a specific function should do under a specific set of circumstances. I think that writing tests this way legitimately makes failure cases a lot more obvious, and it also makes your function branching really clear, right? So you can see your cyclomatic complexity just based on how far the indentation goes. So to juxtapose two different pieces of code, right, code snippets here, right? This first one says, adds 5 to the value when the first operand and the second operand are present, right? Cool. But the second example, it says when the first and second operands are present, then it adds 5 to the value, right? And the reason I like the second one is because I immediately think, okay, well, what happens when the first and second operands are not present, right? Like what does my module need to do in that case? So let's do some introductions. I'd like to introduce you to Paul, the testing, predicting, and observing library for Faith, which, if I remember the backronym correctly, is Fennel Advanced Interactive Test Helper. So yeah, I made this with this little image to ASCII thing. Took an absurd amount of time. Probably spent like a quarter of this whole talk on it. Actually, it was probably most of the time. So I started by writing up some goals for this project. And sorry, I just want to make sure I got the text right. Okay. So first was I wanted to make sure that it interops with Faith, right? It needs to return a table, right? The test suite wrapper needs to return a table of tests that Faith can use. I wanted the final test output to be configurable and formattable in a variety of ways. I wanted the step definitions to be evaluated in the order that they're declared. So in this code snippet, right, you have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? And end users, don't need to actually care about the state, right? Like you shouldn't have to connect the dots. And the reason I wanted to use the Faith library also is because Faith is used for the tests inside of the Fennel language itself, right? And it's also, again, like I mentioned, it's compact and it's currently limited by the fact that Fennel can't actually return functions and macros from the same file yet. So my thought was I could add something to this rather than trying to create some library on the side. And this maybe opens up the path for consolidation in the future if that's what makes the most sense. And it also, like, my hope would be that if any of the games that I work on or any of the code bases that I have, if they're using Faith, I could drop this in and it should just work without breaking the existing implementations. And then just some quick constraints that I set. No global variables, right? If you look at Busted from Lua, which actually does this, BDD approach pretty well, or say Jasmine or Mocha from JavaScript, the way that they're able to kind of work through this is with global variables. I wanted to avoid that complexity. And I know being in a Fennel Lisp room, this next one's going to be pretty controversial, but I wanted to minimize state. Don't want too much of it. There's a caveat, of course, that the stateful connection between test creation and reporting can't be avoided. Something needs to be there. But in general, if I can avoid having, again, global variables that carry some sort of state, all the better. I wanted to use Faith and what it provides out of the box as much as possible, right? So it has lifecycle hooks. It has these lifecycle functions like setup and tear down. It gives you the different assertions of, equals, not equals, right? And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting in the way of an end user using any of that as is. And I also wanted to make sure that the data model was simple, right? I don't want any special parsing to have to occur, and whenever you're putting together the reporting. Faith itself returns just a list or a sequence, right, of maps that show, one map per test. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to have to put these together at some point. I'm going to have to zip them together. So it's a lot easier if they're both simple data structures. And if possible, I'd like it to be one file, right? Now, if I have to, maybe I'll have one for functions and one for macros, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't giving people, a nested file structure that was really complicated to integrate into a project. So my first attempt to design this was for some simple test helpers for a game I was working on, and it didn't go super great. So first, one of the first problems I ran into was Fennel format. I use it on write. So every time I write a file in my editor, it formats the code with Fennel format. And below is a set of syntax that I would actually like to see formatted, right? There's each describe, scenario, context, whatever you want to call these macros. They're treated as macros and just get the 2-space indentation. But when I used Fennel format, it did this, right? Right. So it this is, the canonical way of formatting most lists, right? But the how far it kicks it out to the right was just really hard for me to parse and write. And I just didn't want to deal with this. So I tried to figure out how could I, work with Fennel format to make this happen, right? But I learned that this isn't trivial, right? There's value in, keeping that canonical shape. But instead, I tried to navigate around it, right? So one of the things was I hacked it locally, right? I just added the macro names into the file and recompiled it, whatever, but that's kind of shitty. Then I, added a naming syntax in my editor to skip the tests, right? So if I had a file named assertions.test.fennel, then, my editor will say, hey, this is a test file, not going to run Fennel format. That's great. And look, I know that running formatting on save can be seen as unbecoming, gauche, or even disgraceful, but I'm just going to say that I've happily accepted the lost hours of my life in order to not have to run it manually in a terminal. But needless to say, this first attempt was a complete failure. It did not go well. I tried a recursive function, and ultimately table unpack just completely took all of my lunch money, right? I felt completely incompetent trying to figure out how to pack and unpack and dealing with var args and how that puts all of your arguments into its own table. And so I just ended up with this nested table hell that was just causing me to bang my head against the wall. Ultimately, it was kind of feeling like I needed a flatten function, but that seems like maybe I was just not good enough at understanding how to navigate, say, trees, right? In this kind of a way. And so I gave up. I was like, whatever. But then I came back to it and I was like, let's try macros. I hear that those things can do this, right? So I tried again. And this time I made a generic recursive step definition macro. So the idea being that there doesn't have to be any coupling, right, between, okay, you have the outside test suites thing that is created, and then you have everything inside, and you have to make sure that those are called in that specific way. Instead, you have a generic wrapping function, and then I just alias, describe, context, test, whatever you want to that same generic structure. And, I ran into a couple of problems with this, right? So this is the first time I'd ever written macros. I've looked at them before, but it's commas and apostrophes and ampersands, and it's just damn, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But the documentation in Fennel Enclosure was helpful. I would go to, fennellang.org/reference, then /macros, then back to /reference, then back to /macros. And I'm like, okay, I think I sort of understand this, but maybe I'd run into problems. So I'm like, okay, well, how does Clojure do this, right? Let me go read its code. So here I am sitting in a coffee shop reading how Clojure testing works, right? It's who does that, right? But ultimately, all of that culminated in me having some sense of how to do this. And I actually used Fennel's language, or like built-in macros, the threading macros, do2, etc., to really understand how these things worked. Those felt like good examples to look at, in spite of the fact that, you know, all of those don't have access to the macros. So sometimes they can actually be a little bit verbose, which is okay. I also ran into problems running macros in the REPL plugin I use for NeoVim Conjure. It just took me a second to kind of figure it out, and I had to, you know, update my configuration to make that work. But hey, this eventually worked. It actually spit out the table that I was expecting. Faith could read it, and we were off to the races. That's awesome. But it was kind of surprising and jank. So I know that we can't see this super well. So unfortunately, present term doesn't sort of auto adjust the slides based on the text size. So, you know, bear with me here. But, you know, you can see here this function. I commented out all of the asserts and helper functions. But basically the idea, right, is you check whether or not the form that's passed into, say, describe, right, is a step function. And if it is a step function, then what you do is you push that into, you know, the aggregated log of step definitions. That way I can, again, zip it later with Faith's output. You know, and if it's not a step function, then what I do is I go through all of the next forms, right? And I, you know, recurse. So I push a step on there. And there's a distinction here too. I think it's a bit confusing. There's like, there are step definitions that just have text. So your describe and context blocks. And then there's steps that have assertions. And so the difference being assertions are ones that actually carry tests that you want to evaluate. But as like simple as this looks, right? I liked how, I don't want to say elegant, but I liked the fact that it was pretty clear what was happening here for me. What was not obvious was that the children forms that are passed into the wrapper are never actually evaluated, right? The outside macro treats it as just text essentially, and then throws that all into an array and spits that out at the end. So they're converted right into a sequence. And so if you put something in there, it probably wouldn't evaluate the way you would think, right? And ostensibly, I could work around that, right? I could create some handling for it. But this kind of felt like one of those, I don't know, weird functions that tries to do everything and then, you know, creates its own DSL on the inside. It just didn't seem like a good approach, but it was a good learning experience. So my third attempt, right? It's flattens comeback. I'm like, okay, like let's go back to non-macro, right? You know, I'm just like, heck it, I'll use flatten. I don't care. I'm just gonna go back to the first approach, right? Take my learnings from these things, and I'm just gonna write a flatten function, and I'm gonna, you know, accept that that's just what I have to do. And this actually worked, right? And I actually got, you know, to a pretty good place with this. Didn't have to use macros, and it felt pretty good. The, you know, the code didn't totally suck. And this time I wrote some actual reporting, right? So if I pop over here, which I'm realizing now that you can't see this very well, so I'm going to zoom in just a bit. But if I run make test, right, with Topal, you can see here on the left, I've got some example, you know, test suites, right? So here's one that tests the output for like the actual reporting output. And this is not one that I want to show. Here we go. Here's like a Fibonacci sequence, right? You can see here that it goes through each step and like just validates that the first 10 or so do what you would expect. And then here I have a nested set of test assertions, right? Here's one, another one, another one. And so when I run make test, it actually, you know, creates this output. It's a little goofy because you can see under the nested tests, the step definitions that don't actually test anything get a check mark, which makes no sense. But part of that is, you know, I haven't completely fleshed out the data model such that you can make it distinct, or such that you can make those two things distinct. But I was pretty happy with this, right? I was getting some of those, you know, some of the like output that looked familiar to me, right? The different like test suites that I've used back in the day with JavaScript. I just really liked being able to see all of the tests here and to read it, and such that like it doubles as documentation, right? Like I can actually go through and see just how my application is performing as I make changes. So this is what that looks like, right? It's a little bit similar, but here you do have a distinction between the wrapping function and each step definition. So it's relatively simple, I'll say. You take your steps in as a var arg, right? And you iterate over those. So I do this thing, it's like, build the test suite. And what happens inside of each individual step definition is that it goes through and it takes all of its children and decides, okay, is this an assertion or is this a step definition? And then it basically bifurcates, right, the sequence into 2 separate sequences. And so what it'll do is it'll return, if there's no more children, then it just returns itself. And then if it does have children, then it flattens itself and then it, recurs, right? So ultimately, this was like pretty simple. And again, this is the state that I was talking about that I needed between the T'Pol like code and faith. I push the test suite results to the stack, and then in reporting, I can pop that stuff off the stack and I can zip it with the faith output. And what's nice is that all of the functions are keyed, with something like test function 1, test function 2. So when you're over in the reporting world, you can associate them deterministically. But yeah, some other problems, right? I just ran into a lot of asserts. I was kind of wanting something like Clojure spec, and writing my own like pure flatten function took an embarrassing amount of time. Like I was just chasing tail call recursion until I realized like that's not really possible. And so ultimately, though, I was kind of proud of the fact that this actually worked. So, some possible improvements, right? Refining the data model, like I mentioned. And then, this is now pretty easy to add a macro on top that just spits out these functions.
Go.
Awesome.
We're back.
We're back. Cool. Yeah, so like I was saying, the advantage of this approach is that all the heavy lifting happens at runtime, right, without the need of macros. And so if I do add macros, all I'm really focused on is generating the syntax to get it into the shape that the runtime expects, rather than trying to do all of the work with macros. Because one of the problems actually is because faith runs at runtime, but the T'Pol runs at compile time. Maintaining state between the two becomes kind of difficult, right? So it's actually advantageous to have the, I think, meat and potatoes with like at the runtime, because then that data is more easily accessible, both inside of the hooks that I use for faith's reporting and inside of the step definition parsing. And this is, a rare vintage photo that I found on the internet of me chasing my own tail. It's an ASCII reproduction of Alfred Davia's dog chasing its own tail. Definitely check out their art. It's really awesome. But anyway, spent too much time making ASCII art. So yeah, this worked. And then I thought, okay, let me try, just for my own edification, I'll go back and try some other attempts, right? So here's my 4th attempt. Instead of a macro that just eats all of the, children forms and syntax, have it stop at that boundary, right? Like just evaluate all of the forms, but do it such that it can expand into what we need. So the way that I wanted to do this was have, these step definition functions where the first parameter is either a description, right? So context, when this thing happens, or it's an object, or sorry, a table. And if it's a table, then that means that it's already been expanded by the macro. So the idea is that the state, right, the logging, that can sort of be passed in iteratively to each, each expanded form, such that, the very bottom form will have the complete amount required, and then it can just return the entire data structure. So similarly here, right, you can kind of see def step. I keep changing the names, but here's my, step definitions. But you can see, right, it's like, okay, if it's called with a configuration, right, then what I can do is I can just use what's there. If it's not, then I go ahead and I insert the form, right? It's kind of like the threading macro. I say, okay, take this configuration and throw it in there. But this kind of just looks like the last attempt, to be honest, but now with more steps. I didn't finish this one. I don't know that I actually will. And then I was like, with some help from Technomancy, right? It was like, maybe I should just consider some stinky macros, right? Some unhygienic ones. So rather than trying to pass in this, data object, what if, again, you have the wrapping test suite and that creates or rather it binds a variable for the log, and then every single child has a way to push to that. And so you can see here, I got really far with this. Here's my unhygienic state variable, really good stuff. No runtime errors or, anything coming from FennelLS. It's just gorgeous. Anyway, I don't know if I'm going to finish this one either, but it did bring up an interesting question of like, are unhygienic macros always bad, right? Is that something you should always avoid? Are there use cases for it, right? It's kind of like there's a whole world that opens up if you are able to break that rule. And I don't know enough to really say yes or no or what the different use cases are, but I'm trying to at least question and reevaluate that assumption and try to learn a little bit more about what could be possible if we bend that rule. So what did I learn from all of this? So the next time I write a macro, start with the data structure, then the expanded form, and then the macro. Like, I know this is obvious to all of y'all, but for me, this was like big news. It just makes sense to work your way backwards. I think exploring more than one data model would have made sense, right? Like the fact that I clinged to the flat list really limited me, right? So if every single step definition just returned a sequence, and then you'd just have a tree of sequences. Maybe it is okay if the reporting, untangles all of that. Maybe there's a way to do that. I think I maybe struggled to find a way to maintain the associations between faith functions and that, but I could have explored it, but I just kind of lost sight of that when I was, 7 attempts deep and trying to figure this thing out. I should have spent time getting assert REPL working inside of my editor. There were so many prints, right? It was just purple rain all over the place. Sorry. But you know what? Like, maybe I should have just written my own test library. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. Like, this was maybe more trouble than it was worth. Or better yet, maybe I should just never use behavior-driven development again. Or maybe I should just not write tests, whatever. I don't care anymore. This has been too many weekends trying to figure this stuff out and learn a bunch of stuff. I just want to make games. Like, why am I doing this? But no joke, right? Like, was this worth it? I don't know. I think so, sure, right? Like, you tell me. This is cool. I like this output. I like the ability that I can do this. That's kind of awesome. But, maybe it makes sense to write something else entirely. Who knows? But this is how you learn macros the hardest possible way, right? This is, just adding the friction, really just make it hard for yourself. So thank you, folks, for giving me some time today. If you have any feedback for how this talk landed for you, I invite you to reach out, say in the Fennel Matrix channel or, over email. I'll post that here. If you want to yell at clouds about the correct architecture or what you think about behavior-driven development, and using, say, a Fennel-specific library versus busted, come hang out in the channel. Here's my matrix and email information, and just, special thanks to Technomancy for reviewing my code a couple times, and to the folks who made Present Term. This was really awesome to use. But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks. That was great. I love following along with the journey. Really, really fun. So yeah, great presentation. And would you like to take questions now, or should we we can, if you'd rather, we can save them for the end?
Yeah, no preference. I think if anyone's got, questions or thoughts, we can answer them now. But if it makes more sense to wait, like we can totally do that too. So I kind of defer to you here. Oh,
Yeah,
is that a
Andre's
question?
looks like Andre's he's on the Jitsi,
Yeah.
so I don't have to read it from chat. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, really great talk. Thank you very much. It was
Thank
really
you.
interesting because I found myself in a similar place when learning macros, and I have a ton of libraries that have crazy macros. I don't even understand them anymore. It's that crazy. Yeah. So, but I'm interested in like you mentioned in the end that it would be interesting to implement your own test runner, and that's what I did in FennelTest. Have you seen it? Maybe that's exactly what you need.
Yeah. No, okay. Funny you mentioned that. I did see, because I looked at your CLJ lib library, and then I do think I saw the test library. Those are distinct, right? Those are two separate libraries.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember why I didn't want to go with that. Like maybe I made some sort of, I don't know, like call in the field there, but I bet again, probably should have just used your library, right? It probably did what I wanted, and if it didn't, I probably could have hacked in what I wanted. But yeah, I did actually read your stuff, so thanks for having that be available.
I'll post a link on IRC with example of how you can configure the test runner, because I like your interface in the terminal where you have check marks and everything. So recently I went really crazy with my own, so I think it will be interesting to you. So if I post it on IRC, I think you should be able to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank again. Great talk.
Yeah, hey, thank you so much. That means a lot.
Cool. All right, great. Thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we've got that in the chat on Matrix and IRC. Cool. So next up we've got Alex Griffith, and I think I'm going to restart after this talk because I think we should have enough to make it through the 1 hour limit here, and then kick it off again before the final talk. So Alex, if you're all set, I think the floor is yours.
Perfect. Yeah, and if this goes longer than the 15 minutes or longer than the hour, I'm in trouble. I'd like to. The first thing I loved Emma's comment about how we're in a cycle of chasing your tail, and I feel like this project mirrors that quite closely. So today I'm going to be walking through my approach to interactive game development with Fennel on the web. I'm Alex. You can find me on Mastodon at AlexJGriffith at mastodon.gamedev.place. I dropped a link to the software that supports this in the IRC, so you can clone it and follow along the second part of the demonstration part of this presentation. So, what's the inciting incident? For the 2024 Autumnless Game Jam, I want to add WebSockets. I want to have them working in Emscription and writing the wrapper to get WebSockets working in Emscription. That took a couple hours. But what was a real pain is actually implementing the game logic in Fennel. My normal design philosophy is I build it on Linux, I build it iteratively on Linux, and then I test it on web and Windows just to make sure it works on those platforms. When I was trying to build on the web first, or use the web as like a first-party platform, I ran into a lot of pain points. For every single build, there's a long iteration time. There's no interactivity when running the system. The big issue for me was there was no module reloading, and there's no ability to recover from crashes. So anyone who's done development with Fennel and game dev knows that, especially without a type system, at least for me, I often make little trivial errors that will crash the machine, or crash the game. Running on Linux, it's easy to use pcall or xpcall to recover from that crash. Running on the web, there's no real way to re-interact and reboot. The first thing I did was sort of look around to see what's available. The FennelLang website actually has a REPL that's written in Fingari, written to target Fingari. It's useful for testing Fennel online. So if I pop over, I can say, hey, I want to learn how to use Fennel. I can add numbers. I can probably use the globals to print something to the log. Global con log. Hello world. Can you guys not see my screen or hear me? What's going on?
It's coming through okay for me. That's curious. Let's see. I'll ask in chat about the YouTube folks.
The stream on YouTube was fine when I checked. Except on the stream on YouTube, it's not focused on the web camera feed from the talk. So right now I'm on the screen.
Let me pin this, see if that helps. What's that? Yeah. And if you're having trouble, maybe if you're in the Jitsi as a speaker, you could try dropping and going to the YouTube instead. It's linked from conf.fennellang.org. See if that gives you better luck.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak just to see if it refocuses me to the main screen on YouTube. And there we go. I seem to be up on the main screen on YouTube again. Cool. And I pinned myself. I pinned myself in Jitsi so I can see myself. Maybe if you're in the Jitsi, you can also pin me as well for the presentation, so it stays as the primary focus. Okay, back to playing around with what exists. So, for example, you can go to the and once again, if you're still having issues with, just going to check again. Yeah, I can still see myself on the YouTube. Okay, so you can play around with the console, or with the REPL, and you can play around with the language. You can interact with the DOM in a limited sense. It is on the REPL page. Or on the main page, it is sanitized. You can't, for example, reference the document to overwrite the document, so you can't go too crazy, but you can have a pretty good time. So my first thought was to actually implement basically what we had here, but in a more in an all-in-one, in like a sort of a text editor environment, like we have what we have for Lewis or Fennel C. So my first test was to actually say, hey, let's go ahead. Let's see if we can get some sort of interactive connection going. Pull the logic out of the main Fennel language page and have it running independently. I'd done this back in 2020, but it was sort of a hack. Now I want to get it running with the full Fennel REPL, and we can see now we can overwrite just like before. We can log to console, but we can also do a full overwrite. So, for example, I can go look at my globals. Go global document. Now let's demonstrate console log hello world. Boom, I can do that, and I can also overwrite what is in my actually displayed. So I can look and see I can poke around. I can go to documents. Was it get elements by tag name body, and then if anyone's worked with Fengari, the objects returned from the global function are actually zero indexed. So to get the actual body, we can index here, get the body. It works, but as we can see, we don't have any sort of editor control. There's no, if I load in a module, there's no way for me to hot reload it. This sort of interface is really limited. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, hey, it would be great to have this REPL. It would be great to have a tool that could run directly from Emacs or any other terminal-based editor that would just work, that would let me reload my modules, would let me recover from crashes, etc. So I went back to the drawing board and put down my design considerations. I wanted a one-to-one replacement for the current command line tools. I wanted to attempt to reach feature parity with the Fennel REPL, so not using eval, but actually using the Fennel REPL. And I wanted to support at least both Fengari and Love2D. Fengari and Love2D come at hosting Lua on the web from two different approaches. Love2D compiles Lua, the actual C Lua, and it into a hosted inscription environment, Whereas Fengari basically is a rewrite of Lua 5.3 in JavaScript. So they both have their pros and cons. Fengari works really well if you want to interact with the DOM a lot and use it as a drop-in replacement for JavaScript, whereas compiling Lua to Inscription gives you a much better performance. When thinking about developing this, I broke the responsibilities down into 3 independent components. There's the work that your editor or terminal will do. So for example, in Emacs, this would be Fennel mode. There's the work that the interface would do. So this is the actual program I would be working on. And essentially all I wanted to do was have it take standard input and output, and then handle reading and printing. So if we think about the classic read, evaluate, print loop, it would be the reading and printing portion would be handled by the interface, and then the web page. So this could be written by the users, or however you want to host it, and this would do the evaluation portion of it. Normally, when you think about this, it would only be split in 2. It would be your editor and your terminal, and then the interface and the evaluation portion would be merged together. But here I'm trying to split it out. Looking at the interface, so this is heavily dependent on CQs for handling asynchronous input and output. So CQs lets you kind of do coroutines at the OS level, which is really fantastic because it works fantastically with Lua. It's also the library behind Lua HTTP. So if you're going through all the effort of getting Lua HTTP to run on your system, CQs will be right there ready to use. The downside of using CQs, there's no Windows support, and there probably will never be in the future because it's so dependent on the base design of the Linux kernel. I use 2 tools in 2 JavaScript or web-based tools. I use WebSockets for the bidirectional communication, and I use server events for single direction communication. I initially tried to put all the communication on one layer, on the WebSocket layer. However, I found splitting into 2, like an in-band, which is the WebSocket, and the out-of-band, which are server events, really helped to simplify the design. We can think of the interface as having 4 components. There's that basic reading and printing component that we discussed in the previous slide. So it's basically it can take any input, pass it blindly to a web page, and then take any output from that web page and present it back to the user. So we don't care at all what's done on the web page. We just care about receiving input and sending it back. I wanted to have syncing files working, so I wanted to be able to say to watch a directory and then send a signal up when there's been a file change. I wanted a way to pack initial files, so I wanted to be able to take a whole directory and have a way to iteratively build that file package and send it up to the web in one request to speed up the initial load of a web page, and to work in environments that expect an actual environment or a file-based environment like Love2D. And I wanted a way to host. So I wanted to host the web pages that are doing the evaluation. I want to be able to host these other syncing these files that we're trying to sync statically. So all of this kind of falls into the WebSocket Studio program, the one that I've linked in the IRC. So built into that are a few built-ins. I've built in support for Fengari. I've built in support for Love2D. However, you can write your own like index.html that will take in, will open a WebSocket, listen to events, and make responses. So here's an example implementation just written in simple JavaScript that will open that WebSocket, listen for an event, and then echo it. So we can see just how simple it is on the browser side. I'm literally opening a WebSocket, adding an event to that socket to listen for messages, and echoing that message back to the server. So you can imagine if I wanted to, for example, write a JavaScript interpreter or a REPL, I could simply have it eval the data and return that. Jumping onto Fengari, it gets a little bit more tricky. Phil already walked through kind of how you set up a REPL using coroutines. Because Fengari relies on Lua or implements Lua 5.3, we do have full coroutine support, which is fantastic. So just like with the Echo version, we're opening a socket. We're then creating a REPL, And then we're just listening to these events from the REPL. So for example, if I get a message event, just like with the I'm listening to the message events just like I would with the echo. However, instead of sending the response, I'm resuming that coroutine, passing in the event data. From the coroutine's perspective, it then resumes at the read chunk portion, continues evaluating. If it successfully evaluates, it then sends the response to the interface using the simple socket send. And then if it's an error, it just sends the error message. So this is while it looks a little bit it's interleaved, it's quite a linear approach, and it lets us use the full Fennel REPL without any modification. So for example, you can keep your local state, you can have your documentation, you can have your completions, anything you want to run or through your Fennel REPL, you can do now through Fengari. So implementation for Fengari took about an afternoon. Implementation for Love2D took about 3 weeks. So this is where Emma's comment about chasing your tail and the kind of a descent into madness applies in this situation. I was thinking about having my entire talk on why Lua Puck 5.1 gives me nightmares, but I figured that would be a pretty depressing presentation. This I figured I'd take all that negativity and kind of slam it into one slide. As an overview, Love2D usually relies on LuaJIT. That's the default Lua interpreter it relies on. LuaJIT, as we know, is ABI compatible with Lua 5.1. The issue with LuaJIT is it's a VM written in assembly. While it's been ported to ARM and MIPS and other architectures, it has not been ported to WASM. Because it's written in assembly and there's no C standard or C version of it, it means that we need to rely on Lua Puck 5.1 when running Love2D in the web. I've put need in brackets or in quotations here because in theory, Love2D can work with any version of Lua, 5.1 plus, so they could run with 5.2, 5.3, or 5.4. However, a lot of the libraries people write for Lua depend or assume that you're running LuaJIT, which requires us to run on Lua 5.1. So whenever I do work on Love.js, I always make sure it can run with Lua 5.1. Lua 5.1 does not permit resuming coroutines across the C boundary. So what this means is I can create a coroutine, I can do pure Lua functions, and then I can resume that coroutine, no problem. But as soon as I try to use anything in the IO or OS libraries, we'll see a breakdown. We'll get an error saying that Lua cannot resume a coroutine across the C boundary, and the program will crash. So to make sure I can support Lua 5.1, I forked Lua REPL and sort of degloved it or unwrapped it completely to work in a stepwise fashion. So like Phil mentioned in his presentation, to get things working stepwise, or to get things written to be run using a coroutine to work stepwise, basically you need to unwrap the entire function. So rather than interrupting the function partway through to get data, we now pass in data through an evaluation of the function. So I can now create a new step REPL or a REPL by passing in the option stepped REPL to the step REPL. Step REPL functions exactly the same as the normal REPL when you don't pass in this variable. So you can use the same library or the same fork for both your good, happy case where you can actually use coroutines, and for this terrible case where you're in a world where coroutines do not operate over a C boundary. And just like in Phil's example earlier, you can pass in strings and they get evaluated. By default, the on values prints to the screen. And unlike the previous version, rather than using a read chunk, we're always taking the input as the first variable passed into my REPL. So we can see we can do 1 + 1, it'll return, and we can also do partial evaluation. So we can do 1 plus or +1, wait for the next bit of input, and add 1 to get the response. So with this rewritten, we get something very similar to what we have with Fengari. So we can create a new WebSocket. We then have an on values and on errors callback passed in through our options. We can notice the absence of read chunk because read chunk will not be used in seprepl, and instead values are passed in by calling the return function. We can then initialize that function without using a coroutine, and then basically every time we receive a message, we evaluate that message by passing it to the standard input output. We determine if it's completed the evaluation or if it's only a partial completion, and then we can send the updated text. Just like with the Fengari case or the case where we can use coroutines, we will still rely on the on values callback to send text back to the interface. So now we've gone through the kind of the overview of what the interface does. We've gone through how you would implement your own REPLs in either in both in JavaScript, in Fengari, and in Love2D. Now, to get working with your environment, it depends on the environment, or to get working with your editor depends on the editor you're using. For me, I rely heavily on Fennel mode in Emacs, and I've got a little wrapper written in Love2D Fennel. And in the latest version of that Fennel wrapper, I've added a parameter for Love.js, so I can boot Love.js. I can set the Fennel program that will be used for Love.js, and then bound a specific key binding to boot using Love.js rather than using just regular Love. This lets me boot using either, and it'll create its own REPL, separate REPL environment. I'm going to walk through quickly a quick demo with Fengari, just to show how easily you can integrate it into your own environment. So let's go to game.fennel. So because I'm not using Love2D, I'm just using Fengari. I've added the following local variables to the end of my Love2D or to the end of my Emacs buffer. So I overwrite the Fennel program, passing in the WebSocket program, and I changed the buffer name to Fengari REPL just to make sure everything's working. Now I can press Control-Z just like I would when I'm booting anything else, or booting a standard Fennel REPL. And then let's move this over. I can now load this up. You can see once this successfully loads, I can see that I have the prefix or the leader to my REPL. Just like when we were working online, we can do simple evaluation. We can do partial evaluation because we are using the full Fennel REPL. You can see there's a small bug about when the two dots are added, but that's something that can be resolved in the built-in. We can also do things like we can make use of the local variables. Local, hey, it's 11 plus a 1, 12. We can read and we can start adding, loading and reloading modules. So I can go ahead. I've written this very simple Pong game. It's only a partial implementation, but I can just go in and go local game require game, and I can start the game loop. Game loop. So let's say I want to debug this because I'm not sure where the actual boundaries are for the game. I can go ahead and I can modify my module. Let's set debug to true. Let's recompile this and then reload that module. Reload. And once again, I can either do it in the buffer in the REPL, or I can use the command Control-CK and in Emacs, and then reload the game. And now we can see where the boundaries are for the boxes. With this, I've met my objectives of having a tool that's a drop-in replacement for the Fennel compiler itself. A tool that implements all of the features of the Fennel REPL, something that supports both Love 2D and Fengari. If anyone wants a demonstration on how, or more guidance on how to write your own wrappers, I'd love to chat after the meeting. You can look at the built-in examples on the WebSockets Codebrick page to kind of see how they're built. The one nice thing I've done for Love 2D is actually allowed you to write sort of a hook function in your specific game. So if I go to the Love 20, my autumn 2024 Lisp game jam, you can see I've written this FennelLoveJS.Fennel function, and what this does is it interrupts, or this is called rate. Oh, if I can switch. This is called during the build phase when the REPL starts, and it lets me do things like replace the default HTML file. So the format of how the page looks, it lets me add other files that you've referenced in your index.html. So for example, if I want to add my own style and I've referenced that file in index.html, I can run my own style. And it lets me overwrite the versions of Love that I'm using. So if I go boot this example real quick, let's go ahead and see if this just works out of the box. Let's go to source wrap. Let's go. I've got to close out of my other REPL because we'll be using the same port. Or close all of Emacs by accident. There we go. Let's go try this out. Let's see if this just works. So we can see I've used my Control-C-B bindings. We can see that we've read from the LoveJS.Fennel, and let's see if that loaded without issue. So let's go back to here. Now, because here we go. So now I've completely loaded in my Love 2D game. I can now move this to the same file or same window so we can see what's going on. And now I can overwrite key functions here as well. Let's demonstrate what it looks like overwriting draw because that's the most visually distinct. So let's local old draw. So once again, making use of the local functions in the Fennel REPL. Local old draw. We'll make this love draw, and let's overwrite love draw. So we can go function love draw. Let's just make it do nothing. Boom. We can also set it to the previous version. So we can say, hey, that was a horrendous mistake. I'm not sure why I did that. And I can go set love draw. If I can type draw to old draw. And anything that's basically globally accessible, you can modify through this. I can change states, so I can go let's load in game state, require game state, lib.game state, and then I can switch to my credits. So let's go to game state switch, require. See if that loaded. Preload, credits not found. Let's see, try mode, credits, boom. So we can see that we've switched over to the credits. I can now open and modify that credits file. Let's say, for example, I didn't like the format of something. Let's say that I wanted, let's say, it's a little bit gauche having your name on 3 lines. Let's say I only want to be credited on 1 line. So sprite art and game code and music, we can all put that on 1 line rather than 3. Boom, that's all in 1. I've saved it. I can now reload the module. And of course, during the demonstration, an issue arose with the file sync. Let's see what's happened with the file sync. So the issue that I was having previously with the file sync was that anything with a dash in it would break because of how Lua handles strings. So that's something that I'll look into. So that's something I'll look into. But in any case, ideally, if I get the dash, because it's mode.credits, mode-dash credits, I'm running into that issue. Let's see if I can actually get an error here somewhere. Let's go to the one thing I need to figure out with Love.js on the web is it eats all of your key presses. So you can't, for example, just load in open developer tools using the normal Shift Control I, because it. Okay, so it's actually reading that it's updated. So I wonder why it's not reloading. If I reload this manually, what do we call this? Mode credits. Oh, okay. So there was an issue with me. I think I called it source mode credits in the module. But so we can see that we can use either the Emacs itself or the command line to reload the function. Let's say that I want to undo that. I can undo it in game. I can save and then reload again. And this is one of the big benefits of using Fennel in sort of an interactive way, is you can, especially when you're doing UI design and you want to make small changes, you can make the changes really quickly and then iteratively change how it changes appearance. That's it for now. If there's any questions, I'd love to take them now or after the chat. And if anyone wants to dive into some more details on how to implement this themselves or how to implement their own sort of REPL on the web, I'd love to discuss this after the conference.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. Really cool deep dive there into all the nuts and bolts of what it took to get this working, but the end results certainly impressive. So, bravo. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, we'll let a couple seconds here go by, see if there any questions come up. But
I have a question, but my question is probably a bit big. So if you remind me, I will ask you it after. But in short, have you tried Fennel Porto REPL in Emacs? Because it can work with custom REPLs. So I'm interested in trying it. So maybe after the talks, we'll try to load your REPL into Fennel Porto REPL and see if it ever works. If it works, I'll be happy. If it doesn't work, I want to know everything that went wrong so I could fix it. Because
sounds good.
Good call.
Yeah, no, yeah. And because it's just standard input, standard output, it should work. I did do a bunch of other, like, speaking of chasing your own tail, I tried using the WebSocket functionality built into Emacs, and it worked great. But the problem was getting it to work with Fennel mode, because Fennel mode relies on comment. Comment expects there to be a process. So then I was creating a fake process, sending it as an intermediary. I'm like, why am I doing this with my life? So I just created it as my own standalone little like command line application, and it was way more straightforward.
Cool. All right. I'm going to just switch off the live stream and get it back going so we don't get interrupted in the middle of this next one. Give me half a second there. Okay, we are back with the final talk, and now I think we're going to have to start calling this pulling an Andre when you give two talks at the same FennelConf, because this is the second time he's done it, maybe the third time, but always love to see what he has to say. Second time, yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, so let's you have the floor. Take it away.
Sure thing. Okay, let me start screen sharing. It should be up. It's up. I can see it. Okay.
Looks good.
So this will be a wild ride. My previous talk was mainly slides and telling stuff, but this one will be a bit different. It's more of show and tell.
Sorry, could we get a slightly bigger font size before proceeding? I think the YouTube stream was saying this was a little rough earlier.
I'll try. I think it's as big as I can go because some slides are really, really large. Is it okay?
All right. Well, yeah, we'll just proceed with this and see how it goes. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So this is my latest package for Emacs. and it's not for like Fennel. Sorry, I just stumbled up my text. So this package is made for Emacs, not specifically for Fennel, but I watched a talk on FennelConf earlier this year about Guile Emacs. And in the talk, they showed like a separate project implementing Emacs in terms of Guile virtual machine. So they are basically replacing the C core of Emacs with Guile, and they have an implementation of Emacs Lisp in Guile virtual machine, because Guile uses a compile tower approach, so you can compile like a higher level language into some lower language, then some lower language, then to lower language, and so you get down to like virtual machine bytecode, and it just executes. So they have a compiler for Emacs Lisp that runs on Guile, and Guile is also like a virtual machine that can run other different languages. There is an attempt at running Lua on Guile VM. So if Guile Emacs ever becomes like a proper Emacs implementation and everyone starts using it, this package will be obsolete. But until then, I thought to myself, so why limit ourselves with Guile if we could like extend Emacs with Fennel? So I made this package, kind of on a whim, but to like further support the kind of known fact that Emacs and Vim are like in a competition, and because NeoVim has Fennel scripting, because NeoVim provides like Lua support, I wanted to approach like NeoVim people and say, hey, we can do that too, you know. So I made this package. So why? Have you ever wanted like to call Fennel from Emacs Lisp? I sure haven't, but still I made this package, so I guess it's funny. Have you ever felt that you can read text from my slides faster than I can read it myself? Because if so, don't worry, I'm not going to read anything else. And if you had any of these questions, I think I got you covered. Well, pretty much, you'll see. So let's just jump in. So this package provides only one macro for Emacs Lisp, which is require Fennel. And this macro does a lot of heavy lifting to like require Fennel into Emacs as Emacs Lisp. So this is Emacs Lisp. I mean, we can execute it right now. And after evaluating, you can see that the result is Fennel. So now Fennel is loaded into Emacs Lisp as a feature. We can execute this code, and as you can see, it returns us a number 6, and it's a real number. So if we edit this code, and sorry, forgive me for like this enormous header, but slides are hard. You can see that I can call an Emacs Lisp function 1+ that adds 1 to like the value. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see that it is Emacs Lisp, it's not Fennel. So if we try to call this, we get 7. So Fennel.eval evaluates this expression on the Fennel side, and then we get back a number value, and we return it. We use it in the Emacs Lisp side with 1+ function. And we can do a lot of stuff with this already, because Fennel.eval basically gives us all of the Fennel language support. So we can, for example, return this as a table. And as you can see, it is transformed into an association list in Emacs Lisp. So if I add another key to this table, it's presented as a list, because unlike Fennel, Emacs Lisp doesn't have like a syntax for hash tables. It kind of has, but it's really cumbersome. So I chose to use a-lists as a mean for representing associative data structures in Emacs Lisp. We can also return it as a vector. So if I wrap this into like square brackets, we get back an Emacs Lisp vector with an a-list inside of it. And we can even have like return multiple values. So again, wrapping this is something like that. Provides us with a list of values, vector, and then the rest of the numbers. So it basically works pretty much how you would expect it to do. So a brief explanation will be simple. So we start a separate process, much like Fennel mode starts a REPL process. We start the same kind of REPL process inside of Emacs. Then all calls to require Fennel will use this process, so you can share like all of the environment between all of your scripts that you want to load into Emacs. Sorry. Package path will be populated with the buffer's working directory. So if you move to some kind of place and you want to load a file, it will be available to you. And if module exports functions, these functions will be translated to Emacs Lisp functions. Other values will be translated to constants, and you can basically like use them from Emacs Lisp. And as you've seen on previous slide, all Fennel values are translated into Emacs Lisp, and also vice versa. So data conversion works like this. In Fennel, we can have vectors. In Emacs Lisp, we will also have vectors. Hash tables, as you've seen, are transformed into A-lists, but you can also toggle a setting that will return them as proper Emacs Lisp native hash tables, which have this kind of weird read syntax, but is usable. So, and this is what internally require Fennel is using for representation and transferring data. Values are returned as lists, and I chose it to do so because in Emacs Lisp there is no like multiple value return, unlike common Lisp, for example. So Emacs Lisp can use lists and apply, and we can distinguish from vectors and lists pretty easily. So this was like a choice for implementation detail. And you can always distinguish from hash tables and multiple value returns by checking if the first element of the result is a proper const cell, which doesn't have like a list value here. It works because Fennel will never return lists, and if we have like something like sequential table inside of a hash table, it will be a vector. So you can always rely on this not being a proper list and check it this way. Or you can use hash tables like native hash tables. Fennel functions are translated to lambdas. They don't look exactly like this. Instead, they like have a lot of machinery to make it work. You'll see later. I haven't figured out how to transform user data. I don't think it's possible, at least like translating it to something that Emacs Lisp could understand, but I may come with some other means to translate user data. We'll see if I ever work on this project again. So true is translated to T because Emacs Lisp and nil and false are one and the same, and they are transformed into nil. That's why I wasn't sure about font size. Yeah, I will pop it a bit back for it. And I close my presentation. So data conversion between eLisp and Fennel works in a similar way. Vectors from eLisp translated to vectors in Fennel. Lists from Emacs Lisp are also translated to vectors because Fennel doesn't have like list data structure. Hash tables in Emacs Lisp, both proper like hash tables native and A-lists are transformed into hash tables. Keywords are translated to strings because Fennel doesn't have a keyword type. Symbols are passed as is. So if you like put quote false, it will be a false in Fennel. If you put quote x, it will be x in Fennel. So you can even pass variable names if you want to, or function names, Fennel function names, I mean. Strings are just strings, and Emacs Lisp functions are translated into something like Emacs Lisp call or Emacs Lisp call anon sim. I'll show you a bit later what's inside of this, but basically you can call Emacs Lisp function with this package from Fennel. So what can you do with it? Let's try to load some libraries, and I can increase my font size again. So here is my library, which I wrote some years ago. It's FennelCLGlib. Basically, it's an implementation of Clojure core namespace from Clojure. And I just read entirety of closure core namespace and analyzed every function and then meticulously ported it to Fennel. So for example, we can have a conj function, and as you can see, it works from Emacs Lisp with Emacs Lisp vector and Emacs Lisp neighbor, and the return value is Emacs Lisp vector, which was conched value. Another example would be, for example, my library for parsing JSON. So we can encode an Emacs Lisp a list as JSON, and as you can see, the result value is a string with like keys A and B, and we can also decode it into Emacs Lisp a list. And now to a more crazy example. So here is my HTTP client, which is a port of Clojure HTTP, CLG HTTP library to Fennel. It is an asynchronous HTTP client that can like do basically everything that CLG HTTP can. And one difference from this project from the other one is that unlike like Fennel CLG lib or JSON, the top value in the main module is not a table of function, but a table of tables. So when we import it like this, the Fennel HTTP.client is not a function, it's instead a table, and we can see it right here. So it is an A list because it's a table of tables. So all of the values inside of it are A lists. And you can see that what Fennel functions look like in Emacs Lisp. We are interested in the get function. It is somewhere here. It's pretty low, but here is the get function. It's read syntax for lambdas in Emacs Lisp, but it's basically a lambda. And as you can see, it accepts REST arguments, and then we have some inner like machinery from this project that basically makes it work. And it calls in Emacs Lisp exports to like call this function from Fennel, basically from Emacs Lisp from Fennel. So if we try it, we get. So here I'm getting it from the table, creating an alias, so we can call it as a function without funcall, and then we are calling it like this from Emacs Lisp. We request that body will be parsed as JSON into Fennel tables. Then when we get the result back into an Emacs Lisp, it is parsed into Emacs A lists. And here is the response from http://bin.org/get. You can see that we have our headers in our body and headers from the requests itself. So that's basically what http://bin get response us with. So we can call pretty complicated and well, we can call a pretty complex library from Emacs Lisp. So it shows us that we basically get all of the Fennel features like coroutines, like macros from Fennel and stuff in Emacs Lisp. But if you want to extend Emacs Lisp, Emacs with Fennel, we also need to be able to call Emacs Lisp functions from Fennel. So in this example, this is a Fennel file, and if I just export it from this org buffer into a separate file, it's basically a Fennel which calls string reverse on the return value from Lisp call Emacs version. And Emacs version returns us a string about Emacs version with some additional information. And if we require this file and call this example, we will see our version string basically reverse. So I am using scammy ung instead of GNU Emacs. We can also like obtain Emacs Lisp variables with elisp.var.variable name, and in this sense we just get a variable which Emacs version is 31050. So we can concatenate in Fennel variables from Emacs Lisp, and with elisp eval we can evaluate pretty much any Emacs Lisp expression and get its value inside of Fennel. So in this sense, when we are calling this function, we get this string from the scratch buffer. But we can also edit the scope. For example, say string upper, if I'm not mistaken. Export it and run it again, and we get this text from scratch buffer uppercased on Fennel side. So you can basically, in your scripts that you are writing in Fennel for Emacs, again, I'm not sure if you ever will do it, but you can evaluate Emacs Lisp, you can get your variables, you can even set variables if you write it with Emacs eval, and you can call functions. But it would also be great if we could not only call Fennel functions from Emacs Lisp, but also call Emacs Lisp functions inside of Fennel without putting them into a file, because a lot of functions in Fennel accept functions as arguments, because that's what we do in Lisp. So we can call this expression. Again, looking at clglib that I loaded previously, you can see that we have names of all the participants of this year's Fennel talk here, but written poorly in the non-conventional way for names, so we can fix it. And unfortunately, Lua doesn't have string capitalize, so because it doesn't have it, we could implement it by ourselves using string gsub. But because Emacs Lisp already has it, we can just call it, and we get back our names. And we can actually edit this and put here a lambda. If I could type. And we can capitalize it and, for example, reverse it. So now our names are jumbled up again. So basically, we can pass functions from Emacs Lisp to Fennel, and it will work out like you would expect it to. And basically, that's it. It was like a quick demo of my latest crazy thing that I basically made on a whim in 3 or 4 days. But I think it shows the extensibility that Fennel has, because I mainly used everything that was already there in Fennel mode, my Fennel proto-REPL protocol to handle data transfer, and I hadn't to do much work except for converting Fennel values into Emacs Lisp objects, and that's also done on the Fennel side. So it was a quick script on Fennel that hijacks the REPL pretty printer to print objects in this syntax that Emacs could understand. So yeah, that's basically it. If you have any questions about this madness, I'm happy to answer, but that's all from me.
Wow, what a wild ride. That's so fun. And this is something you came up with a week ago or something?
Yes. I just watched FennelConf, and after 4 days of midnight coding, I had this.
Oh, that's great. Cool. So that's it for the talks. I think what we're going to do now is we're just have folks, whoever wants to hang out and chat can just join the Jitsi now that we've got everything recorded. If you want to ask questions to speakers or just have whatever kind of discussion you want, we'll open it up. So I'll drop the link in the chat. It's just the same as the Jitsi for the normal regular monthly meetup. But yeah, thanks to everyone who presented. That was super fun and very cool to see all the amazing stuff that you've done. So yeah, I'll have videos posted to spliced up and separated out. It'll probably be available just on YouTube as the one long version, but I'll try to get that edited and uploaded sometime in the next week, and we'll let you know. But that concludes FennelConf 2024. Thank you.